Welcome to the guided reading leveling session for use with the Fontes and Pinnell Benchmark Assessment Kit. I'm Pam Alloway. I work in the instruction department, and I will be your guide today through this process. Down on the bottom and either in the microbytes or on Teacher Binder, you will see some links to print the following documents that are hyperlinked on the screen below: the scoring codes, Kaylee, Auden, and finding the levels. It would be very helpful if you had those as we progress through the training this afternoon. If at any time, if you're watching this asynchronously, feel free to push pause and stop and rewind and do what you need to do to get the most out of this opportunity. Let's go ahead and get started. On our first slide here, you see some pictures of the benchmark assessment kits. The one on the left with the stripes and the orange markings on it is the older kit, which some sites might have. And the one on the right-hand side with the green and the purple stripes, that is the newer kit. They're the same thing, just updated versions. I put a picture of both just because I wasn't sure what the ones at your particular site looked like. We'll start with our quote today. Once you learn to read, you will forever be free. That came to us courtesy of Frederick Douglass. And what we know is that in our district right now, as students are sitting in their seats, more than 2,000 of our students are not proficient readers. And our goal is to have every child be a reader by third grade. And guided reading and UA, doing guided reading, is one of the best ways to start to accomplish that mission. Our learning intentions for this session are to understand the resources that are in your leveling kit, and also to understand the process of leveling your students. Many of you might have been doing this, and some very well-intentioned grade level teammate is giving you the shortcut version, but we want to make sure that you're feeling really confident in understanding all of the bits and pieces that there are to your assessment kits. Our success criteria will know that we've been successful today when you know where to start to level your students, and you are able to identify students in your class, their instructional reading level. Why guided reading of all of the various UA models that we had? Well, in the past, what we noticed is UA models looked a lot like the model on the left. Teachers were working very hard trying to create what they thought their students needed. Some of them were taking students very far in their abilities, but they were all in different directions. Some were phonics specialists, some were working on vocabulary, some were working on writing, some were working on comprehension, all necessary skills. But what we found is that by the structure of guided reading, where it is the same structure that is used kindergarten through fifth grade, with changing texts and content and interaction and goals change as the student grows over time. And because they're using the same structures and the same systems year after year and building on them with increased difficulty, guided reading actually takes our students farther than that various UA model, which doesn't have quite the focus that guided reading does. It's that vertical articulation where one grade level is building upon what has happened in the previous grade level that really allows our students to access complex text and become phenomenal readers. The leveling process provides materials and procedures for observing and assessing the reading levels and behaviors of the students in your classes. Our guided reading gurus, Fontes and Pinnell, devised the system that you see over on the right-hand side of the screen, where they have looked at text and through 10 different characteristics of how text is put together, come up with a gradient and a leveling system. And as you can see, students are leveled in different levels from the letters A through Z. Each group of letters designates to one instructional grade level. For instance, like letters A through D would be a kindergarten level reader. Levels E through J would be first grade readers, and you can see how the trend continues. You notice that in kinder and first grade, there are a lot more levels to cover than there are in the subsequent grade levels. That's due to the fact that in kindergarten and first grade, we start out very simple, and the content and the difficulty begins to grow right away. And as we get to the upper grades, there are many more things that students have to accomplish at a level Q before they can move on to a level R. These are directly linked to the Fontes and Pinnell continuum that is also included in your assessment kit and is what we use when we're teaching guided reading. In your benchmark assessment system kits, you might have one of two systems. You might have system one, which is for grades K2, which consists of the letters A through N. Or you might have system 2, which is for grades 3-5 and contains letters L through Z. You notice that there's a little overlap there between the second and the third grade kits. And so if you have readers that fall into that LMN area that are in both kits, I suggest that you assess your students on the kit for the grade level that they're in. So for instance, if you had a second grade L reader, you would use the K2 kit. If you had a third grade L reader, you would use the 3-5 kit. In your nice boxes, what you find are your benchmark assessment books. There are 2 per level, one fiction and one nonfiction. You have your teacher assessment guide, which goes through the whole process on how to do all of these different assessments that are available. You have a literacy continuum. This one is the newer one with the purple and green. Yours might also have a black spine and it's a white cover with a lot of pictures of students on it. This newer one is expanded, but they are both the same thing and both very perfect for the job that they need to do. You will see assessment form master copies. There are some optional assessments for phonics, word analysis, and vocabulary. We won't talk about those at all today. That's kind of a next level. We're going to just stick with the guided reading assessment forms. You'll see a whole book of all of the recording forms that you would need for whatever assessment you're given, and then a book that gives you the assessments at a glance, overview of everything. So the biggest question we oftentimes have when we start out at the beginning of the year, or we come back and we have a new student in our class is, where do I start to level my students? Especially this year coming back from virtual learning, we didn't often know where to start leveling our students. Well, Fontes and Pinnell has given us one option to do that. And in the student forms and the optional assessments, there is a word list, a where to start word list. And we'll talk about how to administer that. Another suggestion that I would have for you is to take a look at their Lexile level on iReady. Now, Lexile levels and F&P levels don't exactly correlate. They measure different things. They are metric systems that look at text in very different ways. But as you all probably know by now, because you might have given a running record for a student already, you know how time consuming they are. So by looking at the word list or by looking at a Lexile, we're giving ourselves a little bit more of an educated guess. I don't want to start at a G with my reader and find out that they're actually an M or an N and have to go through all those levels. That's a lot of time. So I want to be able to hone it in a little bit closer and a much smaller ballpark so I know where to begin. So again, in your student forms or a Lexile from iReady. When you're going to start and you don't know a student's reading level, again, it's that they're new to the school, we're coming back from virtual learning, the best place to start with that is the where to start word list. And it's a list of words that are in your benchmark assessment kit that have a scoring chart that will provide a baseline place to start leveling students for guided reading. Use this with the kids who you don't have any information about. It's also a very nice way, it's a very short, quick assessment for you to be able to sit down with that new student that you don't have much of a relationship with yet, and just to kind of lower their stress level and give them a very simple test. Now, if I do have an idea of where a student is in terms of their reading level, hopefully next year will be much better because your students will come to you, unless you're in kindergarten, with a Fontes and Pinnell score likely on their pink or blue. Then you're ready just to jump in and have the reading record conference with them. And I would always suggest starting one level above their last recorded score. So if that student comes to you being a level S, well, then start with a T and see where they are. Another good rule of thumb is that as you are leveling up, because they've succeeded at one level, you want to go a little higher and see if we can stretch them, is alternate between fiction and nonfiction. It's a good way to see if they've got a strength. Maybe they're really strong nonfiction readers, but their fiction reading isn't as strong at a level. So that helps us to see a better, fuller picture of the students to look at both of those genres. And what we want to do is we want to keep leveling up until we find the highest instructional level that the student can manage. If it's independent or easy for them, they can do that all on their own. They don't need to be at the teacher table with you to do that. If it's too hard, they're going to shut down and they're not going to learn from that either. So what we want to do is we want to find that instructional just right level so that we can really challenge them and support them through their learning and be able to see where they need to go next. So let's talk about that where to start word list in case you are there. In your assessment guide books, and if you're on the K2 version, it's on page 154, and I believe it's on page 178 in the 3.5 version. You're going to see the directions and all of the word lists. So students would be looking at a word list like this. You could either make a copy of it and have it in a plastic sleeve, or there's a hard book with cardstock in it, and you could just give them the book to read. So the students would see a list of words that looks like this, very simple. You're going to be looking at this section with all of the directions on it. So the directions that I have listed over here on the left are just larger versions of what's on the right. So as the student is reading the word list, we want to start them out with the word list that is a grade level below their current grade. So this is word list 2. This would be where I would start a student if I were in 3rd grade. I want to be able to see what they can do just a little bit below. It's very important that the students read the words down the list and that they spend no more than 5 seconds trying to read a word. You want to, on some kind of a notation form, a notebook, a piece of lined paper, be marking down what they're saying. Record all attempts that they make to read the word, whether they're sounding it out or chunking it into syllables or just completely missing it. After they finish reading the word list, we are going to count the number of words that they read correctly. One of the hardest things for us to do during this whole process is to not prompt or coach the reader. This is a moment in time where we have to take off our teacher hat for a minute and put on our test administrator hat. And the reason for that is that we want to be able to see what they can do independently. Of course, when we're working with them in small groups and we're at the table together, Absolutely. You wear that teacher hat and you coach and you prompt. That is the time. But when we're assessing and trying to figure out where we go, we take that away and we try and keep this as cut and dry as possible. We're going to then record the number of words that they read accurately. And then on your scoring chart, you have down here on the bottom, it will tell you all of the different lists. This happens to be the list for the K2 kit, so it doesn't have 5 and 6 on here. But once I count up, for instance, if they read list 2 and they read 9 words correctly, that would be between 6 and 10, this would tell me I should start leveling them at a letter F. That's so much better than trying to make a blind stab in the dark about where to start. Now, this may not be perfect, but it is a pretty good educated place for you to begin. Now you have that place to begin, and you are going to then start with the running record. The first thing that you're going to do is you are going to give the child the book. A little helpful hint right here is down in this corner where you see the 2 white boxes. I know it's a bit fuzzy and we can't quite read the text here. It's going to tell us RW. That means the running words. How many words are they going to read? And then in the bottom, it's going to say EC, error count. And it might have a number like 19 or 20 or 7. That tells you right there for you to be cognizant of that number. If a student makes more mistakes than are in the error count, that number on the bottom, this book is too hard and we need to stop the activity. So take a peek at that as they're reading and have that in your mind. Okay, if I'm testing them and I'm making notations and they make more than, let's say, 20 errors, because that's what it tells me right here, I'm going to say, okay, thank you. You did some good reading today. We're going to try this again tomorrow on another text. So the student has the text in front of them. And what you have are many pages of the reading record form. We're going to be making a number of marks and recordings on these forms, and we're going to actually practice this. We're going to watch it be done, and then we're going to try it ourselves to see how we do. So you will have several pages of actual text from the book. That will be the sample that the student will be reading out loud to you. You will have, after a couple of pages, I didn't put them all in there, you're going to have something where we're going to mark the accuracy. And then we're going to come to the part where we're going to have the comprehension conversation with them. So let's go back and take a look at the beginning of the record form. The first thing that you have right up here, and it corresponds to number 1 over on the left, is you have a book introduction. You are going to tell the students, you can see it's 2 or 3 sentences, very short amount of information about the book that will get them adjusted and understanding that what they're going to be reading about. In this big area here, I'm sorry, this is the analyzing, and that will be where you record your answers and what you've observed. You have in there also the accuracy rate, the fluency, all of those kinds of different things. This is sort of your overall score from the entire assessment so that it's right there on the front for you when we're done. Okay, so again, we're going to have the reading part where we're going to be looking at their accuracy and their fluency. We're going to be marking down their accuracy and their fluency on these pages. And these are all rubrics, so you listen. As you're listening to the child read, you are deciding on their fluency score based on this rubric. And then the comprehension, we'll talk a little bit more about it as we get there to come up with a total comprehension score. You will notice that these comprehension questions directly relate to the wheel of strategic actions that Fontes and Pinnell is so famous for. And this is, all readers need to do these 12 things at different points throughout text in order to make meaning. And we don't think of this as a clock. It's not like we start one place and go around, but we do have 3 different distinctive areas that students need to do. They need to think within the text while they're reading. That means they're searching for and using information. They're monitoring and self-correcting. They're solving new words. They're maintaining fluency. They're adjusting, or they're summarizing. They also need to think beyond the text. This is this green area here. They need to make predictions and connections. They need to infer, and they need to synthesize and put knowledge together. And then our most higher level things that they need to be able to do with the text is to think about the text. They need to think critically about it. They need to be able to critique it or analyze it. And so you will notice that as you are working through the comprehension questions at the end, you will have questions that cover each of those areas of the wheel. That's something we'll talk more about in your future guided reading trainings. Let's go ahead and move on. So you have linked in the handouts a score a reading record form. And it basically shows you the shortcuts for how to code a reading record while you're doing it. It says score a reading record. You've printed it out and it has the reading behavior and the code. And is it counted as an error? Because as we are monitoring students as they are reading, we want to mark down everything that they are doing. We want to try and make what's happening inside their brain visible on the page where we are scoring them. And so we want to know if they're reading a word correctly. We want to know if they're sounding things out. We want to know if they're rereading. We want to know if they're not able to solve words. These are all, this is all information that we need to get about our readers. So things that are counted as errors are uncorrected words or attempts at words. So for instance, if we say the bush had a lot of fruit, but the sentence actually said the tree had a lot of fruit, that error of bush for tree would be a mistake. Substitutions of proper nouns or unable to read a proper noun. It's only wrong on the first score. So for instance, in one of the kits, there is a story about the Galapagos Islands. Many kids struggle saying Galapagos. They only get it marked wrong one time, the very first time. If a student omits or inserts a word, that is an error each time it's done. It's also an error if the student appeals to you for a word and you tell them. So let's say maybe they had the word leave and they weren't able to say that word, and they look at you, clearly they don't know what the word is and they've stopped reading, and you tell them it's leave, then that is an error and it counts for one mistake. If they were to look at that word leave and ask you, is that word leave? And they got the word, then it would not be a mistake and you could go ahead and confirm that. If they were to spell or sound out words without putting it all together and saying the word, that would be a mistake. If they said the wind was blowing hard, that would be a mistake. If they said the wind is blowing hard, that would not be a mistake. And contractions. If they put 2 words to make a contraction together and it's not a contraction, it's wrong. Likewise, if they break it apart and it says can't and they say cannot, that would also be an error. There are many behaviors that students can do that are not errors. But again, we want to mark these because it helps us to make visible what the students are doing in their head as they're reading. This is especially important with older students because they tend to be able to do a lot more in their brains that we don't hear, more so than the younger kids. If they correct an error, that is not, if they correct a mistake, that is not an error. That's considered a self-correction. And that is something we want students to do. We want them to recognize, oh, I read that word wrong. Let me go back and fix that. It doesn't sound right. It doesn't look right. It doesn't make sense. Going back to the appeals that are not told to the reader. So if they said to you, is that word corrected? And you said yes, because it was, that would not be a mistake. If they repeat those previously misread proper nouns, that would not be a mistake, only that first time. Immature or dialectic pronunciations, such as axe for ask, or idea for idea, or biscotti for spaghetti. And you'll have to decide based on what you know about your students and the level that where they are, which one of those things would be immature pronunciations as opposed to incorrect pronunciations. And then again, if they spell or sound out a word and then say it correctly, that is not a mistake. That's something we want them to do, to use those skills and those strategies that they have to make sense of words. So now we're going to learn about Kaylee as a reader. And hopefully you have printed out your running records in the forms, and you will have one that is filled out for you. And it says Kaylee up on the top, and she is reading the Level O nonfiction text, Snake Myths. So as Kaylee is reading, I want you to have your scoring guide on your left, or if you're right-handed, and Kaylee's running record on your right. And I want you to see how what Kaylee is reading aloud is being scored on her reading record. Let me give you just a second. Let's try it. Okay, so you have Kaylee's running record right in front of you. So you can pretend the teacher, you are the teacher, and you are marking down, you're seeing everything that Kaylee's teacher marked down about her.
Kaylee is reading Snake Myths, a Level O nonfiction book.
We're going to read the book Snake Myths. People tell myths or stories that might not be true about snakes. Read to find out about 5 myths people tell and learn about one of the truths.
Snake myth. Do snakes frighten you, or do you find them interesting? Snakes cause feelings of terror and this is fascination in many people. This is probably why there are so many fascinating stories about snakes. One myth. One mistaken story is that snakes can hypnotize their prey. Snakes don't put their victims into a trance, but it might look like they do. Snakes can't blink because they do not have eyelids that move. So snakes do a lot of staring, but they cannot hypnotize other animals. Some animals do hold very still if they see a snake. This probably freeze out of fear. They are not hypnotized. Myth 2. Snakes' tongues can be dangerous. That's another misunderstanding. In fact, only a snake's fangs are harmful. A snake flicks its tongue to smell the air. It can use smells to figure out which way its prey is moving or whether an enemy is near. If a snake flicks its tongue at you, it's just trying to figure out if you're something good to eat. Don't worry, snakes rarely eat people. Myth 3. Some people think that snakes feel wet and slimy, but a snake's skin is really very dry and smooth. This smoothness makes a snake's skin look shiny and wet. The way a snake's scales move sliding along the ground may also make them look slimy.
Should you read the rest quietly to yourself?
Okay, so let's talk about what Kaylee did based on what you see. There was a little bit more of the story, but then, or the text, and he asked her to go ahead and read that silently, and he was just listening to her as she was reading. So if we flip back to the first page, we notice that on page 1, for fascination, she did not know how to attempt that word. So she looked at him and he told her that that word was fascination. We call that an A for an appeal, and then the T for told. You can see over in the columns to the right that we have many skinny columns over there, and one has the E in it. That's where you are recording errors. So that appeal and told of fascination is considered an error. We're going to talk a little bit about the sources of information used after I go through this, and I'll explain that to you as well. So as we go down, we see that then on a few lines below, Kaylee actually inserted the word fascinating in between many in stories. She had that word then after he gave it to her. It was a perfect word to insert there, but it wasn't, unfortunately, was an error because it didn't belong there. And then you notice that for the title, she read one myth instead of myth one. So because she flip-flopped those words, that was 2 errors. A couple rows down, she read may for might, and then she corrected it. So that's what my arrow, my check mark was there. I had originally wrote may over might because that's what she said, but then she went back and fixed it. And you can see that I now have a tally mark under SC. Those are for self-corrections. And as I tally up the number that she missed on the front page, I see that she had 4 errors and 1 self-correction. Then I go on to the next page, and I noticed that still continued on page 1. That middle line, she said this for they, that was a mistake. And then after freeze, she went back and reread freeze again. That is perfectly okay. That backwards arrow means that she's repeating. That's, I know, in Kaylee's brain, she's going back and rereading because she's trying to make sure things make sense. There was the 1 error though for this, for the substitution of this for they. On page 2, under myth 2, you can see that where the second line where she said in facts and then corrected that, went back and said in fact. So that was a self-correction. That is not an error. Same thing with harmful. She got stuck in the middle there, but went back and started. That is another self-correction, or a repeat, sorry. Go down a couple more lines. She left out the word use in front of smells, but then went back and fixed it. So on this page, Kaylee had 1 error and 2 self-corrections. And then on our third page, on the very last full line, she had left out make and them and went back and self-corrected. So what I do now is I add up all of my errors for the entire text that she read aloud. And she had 5 errors and 5 self-corrections. What I do next is I look at what's on page 4 where I have her accuracy rate. Let me advance here. And her accuracy rate fell right here. She made 5 errors, which gave her a 98% accuracy. On these charts, I'm trying to find the instructional level for my students. I don't want it to be hard, and I don't want it to be independent. What we didn't see with Kaylee's reading record is that her comprehension was not very good on this passage. And she actually had unsatisfactory. She had only scored somewhere between 0 and 4 points. So that made this passage for Haley hard. We would need to go down and level her at a lower level. you don't have the comprehension passage part on this, and we'll do that on our next one. But you can see by looking on page 4 that Haley scored a 2 on the fluency, that she read primarily in 3 or 4 word phrase groups, some smooth expressive interpretation and pausing guided by author's meaning and punctuation. It was mostly appropriate stress and rate with a few occasional slowdowns. I think that characterizes her fluency. So I would go back to my front page and I would write down all of those things. Her accuracy was 98%. Her fluency, she had 5 self-corrections. Her fluency was a 2. Her comprehension, we'll say it was a 4. And then we don't usually do the writing portion of this. That's an optional assessment. So I put her summary of scores on the first one. But what I know about Haley is O is too hard. So that is not where I'm going to instruct her. Now you are going to try it with Auden. Before we take a look at Auden, I do want you to see the finding the levels page that you have printed out, and it has some bluish purpley boxes and some yellow. This shows you just at a glance if a student has a certain accuracy and a certain comprehension, where they are going to be instructional, independent, or hard level. And you can see that up top is the assessment kit 1. That's for levels A to K. That's for our K2 friends. And the one in the middle is the L to N portion of that same kit in the BAS 1. Down below where we have the light blue band, that's for our upper grade kit, L through Z. And they have to be a lot more proficient in the upper grades in order to move along. So that finding the levels page for Fontes and Pinnell, you need to put that in a plastic sheet cover and keep that at your guided reading table wherever you are reading. So the last form that you printed out is going to be for our next reader. His name is Auden. And he's going to be reading the level L text called Dog Stories. I want you to have your scoring cheat sheet right next to you. And I want you to try and mark what Auden reads as he reads it aloud. We will go through the whole process on this one so you can see the comprehension portion as well. I want to give you a little bit of a warning before we start with Auden. He is a very speedy reader. So just do the best that you can. And if you can't quite keep up, that's okay. There is no such thing as an absolutely perfect guided reading record, because kids read fast. Things are happening in the room, and we are just trying to do the best that we can. We'll be able to make an overall assessment of Auden's reading. So grab your pencil, grab your scoring guide, and get ready to listen to Auden as he reads aloud.
Auden is reading Dog Stories, a level L fiction book.
This book is called Dog Stories. April was reading a book about a dog who rescued a man. She decided to write a letter to her favorite author, Julia Reed. She wanted the author to write a book about her dog, Golden Boy. Read to find out what happened. Okay? When you're ready.
Dog Stories. Wait, where's this? April Bailey was reading to her dog, Golden Boy. Her voice got more excited as she read the last few lines. Roxy to the rescue is the best book ever, April told Golden Boy. April was always having big ideas, and she had one right then and there. I'm going to write a letter to Julia Reed and tell her how much I love this book, April said. Who's Julia Reed? Her brother Scott asked. She's my favorite author, April said. All of her books are about dogs, right, Golden Boy? April finished her letter and read it out loud. Golden Boy turned his head
He seemed to be listening. Dear Miss Reed, Roxy to the Rescue is your best book yet. I have a lab named Golden Boy. He's super smart and he is a super sniffer. Please would you write about Golden Boy next? He would be a wonderful dog hero. Your biggest fan, April Bailey. April put out a photograph of Golden Boy in the envelope along with her letter. Hey, don't get your hopes up, warned Scott. She may get a zillion letters a day. I just know Julia Reed will answer me, April said. She's a dog lover, just like me. She stuck a stamp on the envelope. It was a dog stamp, of course. Find your leash, boy, April told her dog. Let's go mail this letter. Golden Boy put his nose to the floor, sniffing. Then he dove back behind a chair. When he came back out, the missing leash was dangling from his mouth. That's my super sniffer, April said.
Let's read the rest of it quietly to yourself, okay?
Okay.
Now we're going to talk about this book.
Let's pause right there for a minute. And let's take a look at Auden's reading record. I'll give you just a minute to compare what he actually said and how it was scored. On page 3, he said rescue instead of rescue. That was an error. There and then he repeated and self-corrected. That was a self-correction. He was fast, he was speedy. A little bit of repeating there on page 5. Page 6, he had some self-correcting where he didn't read words and then read them. Page 7, he left out the date for November 8th. That would have been 2 errors. Page 7, you can see he had some self-corrections there for lab and lamb, and he and has. Page 8, he added in the word out. That was a mistake. That was an error. And then he self-corrected where he added in you a little bit later. On page 9, he was completely accurate there. Page 10, he added in and then self-corrected that too between go to mail. With out, that one was an error. He added in that word. And then we had a self-correction on sniffer. I can't even say it. So overall, he had 5 errors and 8 self-corrections. Whoops, that should have been circled here. This should have been a 97% accuracy rating for him because he had, and I'm sorry, I'm looking at the self-corrections. He had 5. I knew I did that correctly. He had 98% accuracy. I didn't circle the fluency here, but I think he was definitely a 2. He was, the stress and inappropriate stress, he was so fast, but it was not at a slow rate. So that kind of puts him above the 1 level, but he's definitely not at the 3 level yet. So there, we put him at 2 for our fluency. All right, let's go back and watch the comprehension portion now. You are going to notice when you look at the comprehension, and that is starts on page 6. When you do print out these forms, they have a condensed version, which has all the comprehension on 1 page. And I highly suggest you print the condensed form. It just saves a lot of paper. I know some teachers even shrink these down and put 2 on a side, so it's a little bit smaller and fewer pages to run. So when we look at the key understandings, that is what we want Auden to say. The teacher is going to ask questions by prompting him. Some of the questions are here, and some of them you'll notice, especially in the last section, with about the text, he goes off script a little bit, and he might have had some other goals that he was working on with Auden, but you'll see how he scored. So these are the prompts that we can ask our readers. And then here you can say I've underlined some key items that he has shared. And so that's what you want to do. They don't have to necessarily share it all because it'll tell us up here. 0 points reflects unsatisfactory understanding of the text. Either they didn't respond or they could talk completely off topic. A 1 would be limited understanding, a few facts and ideas, but not really the important ones. 2, it's satisfactory or understanding of the text and includes some important information, but doesn't get everything. And then 3 is excellent understanding of the text. And really it recalls all of the most important information and main ideas. So let's watch Auden and the teacher as they have this reading comprehension conference. Let me screen ahead. I know I was on like 8 minutes. So sorry.
Julia Reed, which
The story.
back behind the chair. Dove back behind the chair. When he came back out, the missing leash was dangling from his mouth. That's my super sniffer, April said.
Here we go with the questions.
Just quietly to yourself, okay?
Okay.
Now we're going to talk about this book.
Okay.
So tell me, what happened in this story?
April's favorite author was what's her name again? Wait. Julia Reed, which who loved dogs, and April loved the dog books that she made, and her favorite one was it was called, let me see, Roxy to the Rescue, and she wanted to write a letter to the author, Julia Reed, because she loved dogs and Julia Reed liked dogs too. So she wrote a letter, and 5 weeks passed, and there was no letter. There was just mail and junk, and that in magazines, and then the next day, Julia Reed wrote back to her and said she couldn't read, she couldn't have Golden Boy in it because she doesn't know, and doesn't know who Golden Boy is. So she has to know who Golden Boy is to write a story about him.
Anything else that happened?
Well, not really.
So tell what you learned about April and the things that she likes.
I learned that she likes dogs, and she has a dog that's named Golden Boy, and she really likes to read Julia Reed's books, and her favorite one is Roxy to the Rescue.
And how do you think April feels while she's waiting for Julia Reed to answer her letter?
She feels sad, but she knows she will come. She feels confident that she will get that the letter will get there.
And in the end, April learns a lesson about being a writer. What do you think she learns?
I think she learns that sometimes you have to write about stuff that you know for like nonfiction books, but you have to like know it before you write it because it might not be true. So, yeah.
What's the genre of this book?
Fiction.
How do you know?
Because they like can't like the brother Scott was right. She might get a zillion letters a day, And well, it could be, and there were like pictures in it that were like not nonfiction pictures. It could be like a realistic fiction book though.
What makes you think that?
Because that could really actually happen, but it couldn't. So it could be both.
And what do you notice about how the writer tells the story?
I noticed that the writer, she tells the story in like a way that everybody, that she doesn't tell all the clues about everybody, but she tells like the important stuff, the important questions.
Do you think what happens in dog stories could really happen in real life?
No.
Why?
Well, because you can't like see. Well, actually, yeah.
Okay. Why?
Because they could because maybe she thought she can't see the dog, and she really maybe could be in Alaska right now.
Okay, let's go ahead and stop right there and go back to Auden's completed score sheet. So in this top part, he had a satisfactory understanding of ideas within the text. In this beyond section, he also had satisfactory comprehension. And then the teacher took it a little bit to a different level where he was critiquing the text and looking at the genre, but that showed satisfactory comprehension as well. I would suggest, until you are an expert in guided reading and all things and understand all of the parts of the wheel and all of the things that have to do about the text, is that stick with the prompts that are there. I think you'll find that it makes a lot more sense to you. So what we notice about Auden is when we subtotal his comprehension, he had 6 of 9 points there. And when I look back on page 5, I know his comprehension was 98%. So when I am trying to figure out whether this is just right fit for Auden, I'm going to know that his accuracy was 98%. His comprehension was a 6, and that makes this an instructional level for Auden. Okay, that is right where I want him to be, is one of these 3 instructional levels. I hope you're feeling confident, because it's a lot to take in. He was looking back in the book for information, and that is 100% okay for him to look back. You notice the one time he was looking for her name and then he just said it. And then another time he looked back and he started to read it. And you notice that the teacher asked him, can you say that in your own words? Because if they're looking back, we don't want them to just read random pages. We want them to be able to summarize, to paraphrase, to tell us why they went to that portion. Another thing I'd like you to keep in mind as you're working with your students is that as you are questioning them, let's keep this a conversation about the text and not an interrogation of it. We're not trying to find every little detail. We're trying to have a conversation. Why did you think that? And then what? Those types of questions. Okay, let's go ahead and move on now. Think about Auden. You know, what would your next steps be for Auden if he were your student? I think I would definitely be slowing him down and looking at some ending punctuation, so that eventually, reading with a little bit more maybe expression. What would you do? Think about that. We're just about on the downhill slide here. And I just want you to, now that you've gone through the process and you've thought about your reader, we want to think about, how do we make this assessment process as efficient as possible? So remember, we talked about when we get a new student or we don't know where they are as readers, a starting point is to go to that word list or Lexile and try and cross-reference some points so that we can try and figure out the best starting place. It's going to be better than making a blind shot in the dark at it. Having your materials organized is super important. In your kits and in your boxes, you're going to want to have many copies of all of the answer documents for those tests. There's nothing more frustrating than going and needing a level T fiction and you don't have a copy of it. So make sure to ask your grade level teammates, where, or do we have this in the staff lounge? Are we keeping our masters there? Or do I need to be taking my book up? Find out what the process is for that so that you don't get caught short without the materials that you need. Be familiar with the books. That will help you in the reading conference. For those of you who are just starting this journey, there are a lot of books to be familiar with, but in your assessment guide in Appendix A, you will find a synopsis of the stories. So that can be helpful as you're getting going. Don't forget that the text may be difficult and that if the student exceeds that maximum number of errors that's on the front cover, you're going to stop the test right then and there once they get to that magic number and say, okay, thank you. We're going to come back and read another book tomorrow. You don't need to take them through the whole process. You don't need to have them finish reading. You don't need to do the comprehension part if they've already not succeeded on the accuracy. And then in regards to the fluency, just take into account that in general, less fluent readers will take longer to assess. Now, that being said, some of our fifth graders get up there pretty high and they take quite a bit of time to assess as well. And again, finding that just right starting point will get you closest to where we need to be. So you'll have to do fewer assessments on a student. Those of you who are working on this for induction, as an action step on your ILP, I would like you to complete 3 reading records for students in your class. Reflect on what you've learned about your readers, having done this and had the conversation and talked to them, and then create an action plan of next steps for those students. What will you follow this up with? As you read with them, you've learned about them. What are their needs? Look in your continuum. If they're a level L, read about that student in your continuum. Find out what level L readers should be able to do. And since we're not in person today, we can't really discuss some takeaways, but I am always free to answer any questions that you have. You may either email me or try my cell phone. I tend to be in the field a lot, so I don't mind taking calls on my cell phone because I'm not at my desk very often. But I wish you a great day, and I hope this was helpful in your journey on leveling your students for guided reading. Thank you.